And let's begin with our interview with Dan Wos, the author of Good Gun, Bad Guy. He joins us, and we've had Dan on. He's been a guest with us before. Dan, good to have you back with us. Good morning, sir. Hope you had a great holiday.
Hey, KB, good to be back with you here on the radio. And it was a great holiday. How about you?
You know what? Yeah, I think we made it through. Nobody got hurt. Everybody's got all their fingers and toes today, so I would count that as a very, very, very good holiday, considering what could happen if people talk politics around the dinner table. But we didn't do that, and that's probably why everything worked out so well. Let's talk a little bit about the book, Good Gun, Bad Guy. Of course, we've talked about it before, but it's worth mentioning again. It's a good opportunity to maybe open some eyes on the other side, or even maybe the eyes of people that have been supporters of gun rights and advocates saying that, in this day and age with everything that's going on, we even mentioned earlier this morning, 41 shootings in Chicago over the weekend, 11 fatalities, and it's Christmas, and the people up there still don't quit. And you have to kind of look at this, Dan, from the aspect of there's a lot of law-abiding citizens, and all they want to do is protect themselves and protect their families. And people are making it rather difficult, and I guess we'll see how that is going to change for the better. I don't necessarily think it's going to change for the worse when the Trump administration steps in, but still, I would imagine folks are concerned. They'd like to probably see some of these laws come off the books that are prohibiting law-abiding citizens from carrying firearms to protect themselves. But more importantly, let's jump in with some conversation on this book, Good Gun, Bad Guy.
Well, everything you said was exactly true. I mean, you and I agree. We're on the same page on all this stuff. The reason I wrote it was because I got tired of watching the media and politicians, create this narrative, this anti-gun narrative, and use terminology and all sorts of rhetoric and all sorts of lies only for the purpose of vilifying gun owners, demonizing guns, and trying to push this idea that guns kill people to the public. And I started to recognize it. I came from a pro-gun family. My dad and I went hunting and target shooting and stuff, and he was very interested in guns. He was an aficionado of sorts, and he would build muzzle loaders and do all sorts of things like that. Larry Pratt, a friend of mine, we just recently talked to Larry, and he made a very clear distinction. I was taught about guns, and I was taught how to use guns when I was a kid, but I was never taught the importance as a kid of our Second Amendment, of our right to defend ourselves, how important that is. Maybe my dad thought that I wasn't quite old enough for all that stuff yet. But once I started to see, I went anti-gun for a little while, I should tell you that. I got caught up in the rhetoric, got caught up in all the false narrative. But I eventually came back around when I had a personal incident of my own, and I realized that it's important that we protect ourselves. It is the most important thing, and the gun in my belt is not used, but it's there to protect people, as opposed to the narrative that the anti-gunners will spew, and that guns are for hurting people. It's just not true. So that's why I wrote the book, just to kind of dispel all the myths and expose all the lies of the anti-gun side of the conversation.
Do you mind sharing your experience with the listeners here this morning about what changed your mind, Dan?
Well, I can give you some bullet points on it. I toured in rock bands for most of my life. I always played guitar since I was 9 years old. I was always interested in guitar, more so than guns. That was my dad's thing, and I thought, well, geez, some people like guns and some people don't. What's the big deal? But I had an incident. My wife and I were coming out of, and I tell this story in Good Gun, Bad Guy in more detail, but we were coming out of a late-night movie theater in Albany, New York, and we had a run-in with this guy. And, luckily, we were able to avoid the situation and get back to the car unharmed. But I realized in that moment that, I may not have been able to. That situation could have, risen to a level that I would not have been able to protect myself, my wife, which is one of the two most important people in my life is my wife. If I can't protect her and my son, I'm not doing my job. And in that moment, we got back to the car, and I said, luckily nothing happened, and we got out of it. But we got back to the car, and I said, "Look, I'm sorry." And she said, "Well, why are you apologizing to me? It wasn't you. It was that guy." And I said, "Yeah, but I don't know that I would have been able to, protect you, defend you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting a gun." And she came from kind of a non-gun family, so her family didn't really take a position on guns either way. But it was important to get her on board as I started to retrain. It changed my whole perspective, by the way. That was one of those aha moments where I realized that, man, this whole narrative is so wrong. It's important to be able to protect yourself. But anyway, so getting her back on board for the first time was a very careful procedure. And I encourage anybody listening that if you have a family member, spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, wife, husband that's not on board, get them on board if you are, because it's important. Their fear is not more valuable or more important than their life. And I think education is important in that respect. So get them on board.
Would you say, if you have somebody in your family, for example, that's maybe not necessarily a big believer in owning a firearm, or, they have an issue, you still, maybe, and maybe that's a very delicate line to walk, a very fine line, if you will. You've got somebody in your family that's not a big supporter of guns, isn't pro-gun. Have you ever had to run up against anything like that before? And if so, how do you handle something like that? What kind of advice would you give to somebody who says, my son, my daughter, my wife, whoever is not really pro-gun? They almost have a bit of a problem with me, carrying a weapon, knowing that I'm carrying a weapon wherever we may be, whatever we may be doing. How do you get them on board, and I guess maybe it's somewhat of a delicate process.
It is, but you have to remember the one. This is the most important thing. They're not on board because they're scared. There's a level of fear that's been, ingrained in them because for a number of reasons. You have media, you have politicians, but you also have just no experience. They don't have experience with guns, so they're generally going to be fearful. What I did with my wife, I took her along through the process, the entire process. She watched me do through the training, through the licensing, through the research, choosing a gun to carry, everything down to holsters, type of ammo. What are you going to put in your carry gun? And safes, how are the firearms going to be stored? So by taking her along through the entire process, sitting her down on the bed and explaining everything to her, it relieves that fear because now she's got knowledge. Once she has the knowledge, she's going to be less fearful. Eventually, she's been to the range multiple times and she shoots with me every once in a while. And the funny thing about it is once you help someone tactfully. Now, you and I have talked about this before, and it must be done tactfully and carefully.
Respectfully, I think would be a good way to put it, too. Yeah, you got to respect the other person's feelings, regardless of if they are or they aren't, pro-gun, whatever.
Exactly, because your perspective is different than theirs, and you have to, you're right, respect is a good word. You have to respect their perspective. And it's funny now because we could be in a situation that might not look so safe, and she asked me if I'm carrying. So it's a completely different perspective now for her.
And that's very interesting as far as, and I've always, I've been in situations much like yourself where you sometimes you wonder, and you don't want to take anybody. I guess you don't want to force yourself on them or force your beliefs on them. And again, I think you make a good point where you say education is the key because it always seems to open people's eyes when you can sit down and present something to them in such a way that they learn, that they realize that, oh, yeah, there's an issue, there's a problem. I just saw this pop up from one of our listeners. I guess we're going to kind of maybe change the topic here a little bit. But the question is, did our founders give us the right to bear arms specifically so we would be armed well enough to be able to overthrow our own federal government when they became tyrannical and oppressive?
I think that was the idea.
Yeah.
That was the initial idea.
Right.
Yeah, of course.
Well, plain and simple and to the point there. With the answer from Dan Wos, the author of Good Gun, Bad Guy. And Dan, we also wanted to take a little time here this morning to kind of talk about some issues as we look to the future, a future that I think maybe isn't as uncertain as it once was now that we know who's going to be stepping in to that place on Pennsylvania Avenue there in Washington, D.C., and maybe some things that you've heard about him, but essentially we kind of wanted to focus on what's going on with some of the states, maybe in your particular state, and you can tell us about how some of this is being received in terms of gun advocates, those who are looking at gun rights, people who are talking gun control. We need to take our first break. My guest is Dan Wos. He is the author of Good Gun, Bad Guy. And we're going to come back and talk some more with him and get a little insight. As I say, these are the people that are in the know. These are the people that I look to and that I know a number of people look to in order to make sense of where we're headed, gun rights, gun control, firearms in general, and how we are looking at things as we get ready to wrap up 2016, start 2017. I know here in the state of Missouri, there's some new laws that are going to be on the books as well. But we'll talk about all of that and more when we return. It's the Morning Magazine on KRMS.
The Ozarks Today, News Talk KRMS.
.928 is our time. It's the Morning Magazine on KRMS. About 51 degrees, and we are seeing some rain move through the region. A little hit and miss. It's like I said, trying to form up. It tries, and it gets to about, right around the Tri-County region. And then as it moves a little bit more to the northeast, it starts fizzling out. The only real successful attempt we've had at rain here this morning has been that line that was right along the I-44 corridor, which continued to push out of the state. We still have a few remnants of that left, but again, we are seeing some pop-up shower activity this morning with that instability in our system. 9:29 is our time. Our guest, Dan Wos, Good Gun, Bad Guy. That's the name of the book. I highly recommend that you check it out. It's a great read. I've had the opportunity to read over it several times, and great book, Dan, and I hope folks will take the opportunity to at least check it out and open their minds and give you a chance to try and show them just exactly what it's like and what the anti-gunners, as you refer to them, are doing to, I guess, scare people, put the fear of God into people, because, the more people have a firearm, the more that somebody learns how to use it, learns how to train and learn how to use it properly, the worse off the bad guys are going to be, because, you think of all of the situations that we've talked about here, especially certain situations in the last year, and one comes to mind, the nightclub shooting in Orlando, and had someone in that building had a firearm other than just the gunman. Imagine how many lives could have been saved. And I think we say that a lot, but then people would maybe argue that point a little bit with you, and they would say, well, then maybe some innocent people would have got caught in a crossfire. Well, there's always the potential, but I mean, if you at least have someone in the place to even the odds, even the score, so to speak, you really never know what could have happened there. How many of those folks would be with us today, maybe listening in on the conversation, or maybe even reading the book and and getting some insight as to what people don't want them to know. And fear is such an incredible thing. It has the power to shape people in ways that I'm sure that they've never imagined before. But I'm interested to get your thoughts, Dan, on this coming administration. Donald Trump getting ready to be inaugurated president-elect, some of the things that you've seen him do, some of the things that you've heard him do, and maybe just your thoughts on what is coming in 2017 for people who are law-abiding citizens and wish to own a firearm to protect themselves and their families.
Well, first of all, I've been following Donald Trump since the 90s. You know, he's a fantastic businessman. He's got a mind for business that people don't really. I don't think they really see how how articulate a businessman he is. If you read his books, it's just the way he strategizes and the way he does business is it's unbelievable. I think one of the things on the table, I think that we're going to be hoping for with respect to gun rights is what's called the state-to-state reciprocity, which means that just kind of like a driver's license. You have your driver's license, you can use it in any state without getting arrested. That's the idea behind the state-to-state. And I just want to point out a couple things, the good and bad about the state-to-state reciprocity. It would be great for some states like me, New York, because now I would be able to go into Jersey. I'd be able to go into California or some of these, Massachusetts, some of these not-so-friendly gun states, and I would be able to, my license would be applicable. The problem, the downside with the state-to-state reciprocity, and some will argue that it would require all states to have a licensing system, which means now states like Vermont, Wyoming, constitutional carry states would now need to develop a licensing system. So it's going to be great for some, but it's going to be cumbersome and a burden for other states. So I'm not sure. On the face of it, though, right now with what we're dealing with, it would be an improvement overall, I think. The other thing I think that many gun owners would really love to see is a constitutional carry, which means that you don't need a license to carry in any state, and that would be basically a lifting of licensing requirements across the states, and a lot of people would think that would be fantastic, because what we have now with licensing is we have we should have an innocent until proven guilty way of doing this, but with gun licensing we have a guilty until proven innocent. In other words, we have to prove ourselves to in all sorts of ways when we go the good guys. So what it does is it limits the good guys' access to carry a firearm, protect themselves, and it theoretically should limit the ability for bad guys to do the same thing. But inherent in what a bad guy is they don't follow laws. So it really has no effect on the bad guys. If they can get their hands on one, they're going to carry it anyway. So that's the downside to state licensing. So I hope I deciphered the difference between the state licensing and the constitutional carry. Okay.
Yes. Hey, I was checking that out myself while you were talking about it. Of course, constitutional carry for the legal carrying of a handgun, both openly and concealed without requirement of a government permit. It says does not typically refer to the unrestricted carrying of a long gun, knife, other weapons, things like that. That's kind of the definition I saw with that. And there are a number of states, of course, that have constitutional carry: Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, Idaho, Kansas, Maine, Mississippi. It says Vermont, West Virginia, and Wyoming, and also in Puerto Rico, but that is that's what they consider disputed at this particular point. And those, of course, are areas where the constitutional carry falls into place. I know here in Missouri, Dan, we're looking at doing away with the permitting process, I believe, as of January 1st. We here in the state of Missouri will have the conceal and carry, and there will be, again, no need for a permit here, which I think a lot of people, the one thing that people worry about the most is someone obtaining a firearm and then not using the opportunity once they've purchased it or received it in some fashion, it maybe as a gift or something like that, not going through the proper training and getting the necessary education in order to handle the weapon properly. Because for anyone who knows, I guess for anyone who's been in the situation where maybe they've been challenged, they're carrying a firearm, and there's a need to use it, so many different things have to happen. And you have to be able to think very quickly on your feet, because you don't draw that weapon to scare somebody. You draw that weapon to defend yourself or defend a family member. And what do you say to people that, that is their argument, that they're worried that somebody who could legally obtain a firearm, getting their hands on something like that and not going through the training, not taking the proper steps necessary to learn how to use it, store it, safety obviously a big key with all of this.
Yeah, bring it to the schools. And I think that, firearm safety courses in schools, and I know we have, was one college I was just reading about it who's implementing it now, bring it into the schools. Our culture has definitely changed. There's no arguing that. Even back in the 50s, there were firearms safety courses and some gun ranges in high schools, and in some high schools. So our culture has definitely changed. So with something like that, I think re-implementing it in a positive light into society is going to be a good thing, because it brings in that different kind of perspective, and brings guns back into our culture. Does that make sense? Because our the way we used to look at guns was much different than the way half of our country now looks at it. So bringing it into the schools, bringing the education in, and incorporating it into our society, breeding it back into our society.
Well, and it does make sense. And the interesting thing about that is we were having a discussion with a member of law enforcement here not too terribly long ago, and one of the things that she kind of focused on was the fact that a lot of kids these days are buying up these video games, and they put them in as a first person, like a shooter. If it's like a World War II game, or any number of the sci-fi games where you get a gun and you go through and you just blow everything up and blast everything, you shoot things, you throw grenades at it, and some people aren't happy with those games. Some people don't allow their kids to have them, but many do. And so maybe those, to some degree, send the wrong message about guns to our kids. And if you are looking at, as you stated, the education process and implementing some sort of an education program in schools, well, if you can allow the kids to have the video games which show the violent side of things, why can't you incorporate something that would indeed show the proper way to handle a firearm, to load, to unload, to keep it safely stored out of the hands of someone who has no idea what to do with a firearm? I guess it kind of makes all the sense in the world. It certainly couldn't hurt anything, and maybe by taking the education aspect of it and putting it in front of kids, then you wouldn't have so many kids that unfortunately, as it seems to happen, like we were talking earlier this morning about Chicago, and 41 shootings over the weekend, 11 fatalities. I would imagine there are probably a lot of people that are committing those shootings at a very young age, and had they been given an opportunity to understand the education aspect of having a firearm, you hope anyway that maybe that would change.
Yeah, I mean, those kids shooting people in Chicago has nothing to do with video games, I would bet.
Right.
When I was a kid, I was a young kid in the 70s, and we'd play Cowboys and Indians. I mean, we'd break a twig off a branch, and that would be our gun, and we'd have strategy. We'd play strategy. We'd shoot at each other. We did it in a way that we would never go think that it was okay to actually kill a live person.
Sure.
So to me, those people who are spreading that don't have much faith in our kids, because if they think that by playing a video game the kid is going to go out and want to kill people, I think they're missing something there. They're not comprehending the way we think as human beings. There's a difference, a distinct difference. I could go either way on the violent video games myself, but the point is, I don't believe that video games cause people to go out and kill people.
And maybe that's obviously not the case, but maybe it's the violent aspect of some of these games and the fact that does it make violence seem any less violent, I guess, if you want to call it that, to kids. I mean, when you're going through and you're blowing people up or you're shooting up whatever in these games, whatever the game is based on, and they see that blood and they see that gore, and does it seem to then have an effect on kids where they maybe kind of lose a little bit of that shock of actually seeing someone, and the violence that's contained in some of these games is maybe more of the maybe more of what they're coming away with rather than just, as you said, it doesn't cause kids to go out and shoot other people, but maybe the violence in the game, it kind of numbs them a little bit. Violence isn't such a big deal when you've been playing game after game of shooting things up and blood and gore and things along those lines. 9:42 is our time. Dan, we've got a caller on the line. Let's jump in with a quick phone call here. Caller, thanks for joining us this morning here on KRMS, the Morning Magazine, with Dan Wos, author of Good Gun, Bad Guy. Go right ahead.
Good morning, KB.
Good morning, sir.
Hey, been listening to what you've been talking about, and personally, if you go back into the late 60s, early 70s, how many different shows did we have growing up as kids? Gunsmoke, Lone Ranger. Look at John Wayne, and they all used guns. Every kid on my block had a 6-shooter, and it was normally came out of their pocket with a thumb attached to it. And, you never heard about, you saw the killings, but you also know the next episode, that same actor may be,
playing a different role. Yeah.
Yeah,
so
I agree. Good point.
It's not like we've been sheltered from this for a long period of time. This is just something new.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fact of morality. It's a fact of parents saying, hey, this is right, this is wrong, and leading by example. When you have no one to lead, then it's kind of like Peter Pan and the boys, They're left to their own malicious.
Interesting point. And I thank you for that phone call. And that does, what creates the person who wants to do things, and then you get into the whole psychology of it, I guess, Dan. The person that wants to do things according to the way the law has been set up, as opposed to that person that wants to break the law. And then we could probably go down this road all morning long. But again, let's go back to the topic itself. Getting the education in the schools and teaching. How difficult do you think that would be in this day and age? Do you think that there would be a lot of folks that would say, hey, listen, if it's an opportunity to educate the kids and show them right versus wrong, is that something that you think a lot of people would then want to subscribe to?
I think there would be a huge kickback from the left, pushback rather, but there would be a lot of people that would be for it. And I think first off, we need to change the narrative back to an honest gun narrative. Right now, we don't have an honest gun narrative. We have a narrative that says guns are dangerous and unpredictable, gun owners are bad and irresponsibly putting everyone in danger, and all the nonsense. We need to change the narrative first, and that starts with people in high office, that starts with media, and it starts with people understand this is not something that can be done overnight. Gun training and firearm safety courses in schools, I think, is a fantastic idea, but it's not something that'll happen next week.
Right. Absolutely not. 9:45 is our time. My guest is Dan Wos, the author of Good Gun, Bad Guy. We're just kind of kicking it around this morning, and of course, you are more than welcome to jump in at any point. 573-302-7000, 877-330-1150, live at KRMS Radio More on the Morning Magazine after this on KRMS.
The Ozarks this morning.
Get this party started.
News Talk KRMS.
(9:48). It's the Morning Magazine on KRMS. Right now 51 degrees and a cloud or two making its way through, and a little precipitation with those clouds. Eastern Camden County, eastern parts of Miller County as well. As soon as one of these things pops up, it disappears almost as quickly. 9:49 is our time. KB with Dan Wos, good gun, bad guy. And I was talking to Dan off the air. I said, yeah, we're just kind of touching all the bases here this morning, and a great conversation with Dan. Of course, you want to check out the book, Good Gun, Bad Guy. And let's talk a little bit, we talk about fear. We talk about people trying to use fear. The anti-gunners, as you said, anti-Second Amendment radicals. Let's talk about those folks a little bit in detail, and I guess how to some degree you might even call what they do holding people hostage with the use of fear, because as you said, and I think most people know, Dan, fear is just lack of education.
Yeah, definitely. It's lack of information. It's not knowing the outcome. Just like when you're watching a horror movie, you see the killer coming up the steps, and you see the girl scared in the closet, and you don't know what's going to happen. You're scared watching it, but once you find out what happens in the movie, and then when you watch the movie a second time, you're not scared. Why? Because you know what's going to happen. Once you have that information, the fear is gone. We talked about anti-gunners and anti-second radicals, and I always thought there were just people who didn't like guns and people who liked guns. But as I did more research, I started to learn that there are two. I profile them in two different categories on the anti-gun side. You have the anti-gunner, who is somebody who doesn't like guns, they're scared of guns, they don't have any real experience with guns. They don't necessarily want your rights taken away, but they would like to see more regulation, and they would be happy if guns would just magically disappear. But then you have the anti-Second Amendment radicals who know exactly what they're doing. They do want your rights taken away, and they're highly influential over the anti-gunners. They're constantly recruiting. They're constantly putting out their narrative, and they're constantly, creating an atmosphere that scares anti-gunners or scares non-gun owners. It scares them. They use fear, and they also use hate as another strategy. So they get you to fear the gun, so you don't go to the range and learn. And they teach you to hate gun owners because they want you to believe that gun owners are irresponsibly putting everyone in danger. So that way, you take a person, and now they're scared of guns, they don't want to learn, but they hate gun owners, so they're willing to fight. So that's how you create an anti-gun warrior. And you see it in the media, but you can't necessarily put your finger on it. And that's what I think I've done in this book, is I expose it, and I lay it out, and I try to explain what's going on the anti-gun side of the conversation mostly, and try to give examples of how that manipulation over people's minds is implemented.
The psychology is something that can be very devastating, and your mind is such a lethal weapon in itself. And if you don't have that education, because someone tries to tell you how you feel without giving you a reason, or maybe just they give you that reason, but it for some reason or another it just doesn't compute. I know that a lot of times when it comes down to dealing with fear, I think sometimes that's a good incentive for people to want to get the education. I know, much like yourself, as you said, growing up, you were involved with the guns at a very young age with your father, and then you made some moves in your life and kind of went on and got to the point where maybe you were on the other side a little bit, and it took an experience, a life, I guess maybe somewhat life-threatening experience, in order to kind of make you come back around. Did you then say, hey, listen, I want to find out more about this. I'm not going to just buy a gun. I want to know more about firearms. I want to have that education. I want to know how to handle it properly. I'm thinking yes to all of those questions.
Yeah, because once I had that experience, there was I like to use the word aha moment. I had one of those moments in time where everything just kind of clicked, and kind of like when you defragment your computer. We used to defragment computers. Mm-hmm. I don't know if we even still do it, but all the blocks lined up, and it all made sense to me now. The illogic that I had to maintain in my own thought process, the illogic of justifying how guns are bad, it didn't make sense anymore to me. I wasn't able to justify that nonsense anymore because I saw clearly now what was real and what was true, and it's important that I protect myself. It just clicked and it made sense. But we have media, anti-gun media, constantly pushing and perpetuating this anti-gun narrative. So it's no wonder that we have people who are anti-gun. I don't blame them. I feel sorry for them, and I try to help explain what's going on. But it's no wonder that it's like that. And we need to change the narrative, and we need to stop gun-free zones. We need to change a lot of things, and I think we are systematically. We're going to start doing that. The narrative, I think, is the first and foremost.
Do you do any type of work in your state to try and get the message to legislators, to get in front of people who obviously have a hand in guiding the ship in whatever direction it may go? Do you try to meet with these people? Do you have any opportunities to get in front of them and talk to them about what we're discussing here this morning?
I do, actually, and I have. And when I can, and when I have the opportunity to meet with some of these people, I do. But you got to understand, I just I've been kind of this book, the way the book is taking off, and the way people are latching onto it, is putting me in this more of a position like what you're talking about. I'm starting to acclimate to that now because of the book. So it's somewhat new to me as I work my way into the political arena. Mm-hmm. But it's starting now, and the book is the catalyst, I think.
9:56. We've got a caller on the line here, and caller, I appreciate you taking time to join us here on the Morning Magazine with Dan Wos, the author of Good Gun, Bad Guy.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
I've been listening to your program as I was coming back from Eldon, and I'll give you a good example. There's a young lady that was terribly afraid of guns. So I got her out and taught her about guns. She was even reluctant to fire it, and ran into her a short time back. She now has her third handgun. She practices gun safety. She's explained them to her children. She knows to keep the ammo separate from the gun. And it just goes to show you, a person that said, I'd never have a gun in my home. If they get the fundamentals and understand the function and the safety factors of a weapon, she now feels more secure in her home, and she loves to shoot.
Exactly.
And, that's what it's all about. I teach muscle memory and shooting here, and it's amazing the people that you see. And one of my favorite things is tell them, I want the gun empty. And are you sure it's empty and all that? And I'll hold a cartridge in my hand, and I'll chamber and drop that cartridge. You ought to see the look on their face because they're so certain that it's empty, and they'll never handle a gun again that they don't think it's always loaded. There's no such thing as an empty gun. Anyway, I appreciate your program. Have a good New Year's, and thank you.
Thank you for your phone call and your input this morning.
Thank you.
So again, Dan, we've got just a couple of minutes left, but are you hearing more and more stories similar to what the caller explained? Someone had an experience similar to your aha moment, and they said, well, you know what, I've got to do something about this, and I'm not just going to go out and purchase a firearm, but I'm going to get the education necessary in order to handle it properly and safely and try to spread the word to others.
Yeah, I think it comes down to some basics. Recognizing the false narrative that's being perpetrated in the media about guns, and understanding the importance of education, and understanding the power of fear and how it affects people and how it affects their position in the gun conversation. Understanding those things right there will change. Will start to change the conversation. And
I would imagine a glance at the book, Good Gun, Bad Guy, wouldn't hurt either.
Of course. Yeah, of course. At goodgunbadguy.net or .com. Yeah, definitely. Check out the book. I talk a lot about strategy, anti-gun strategy, and understanding it and the mindset. And there's a lot of fun little interviews and stuff in there too. Some statistics, but it's really about understanding the enemy, so to speak, because we can either help some of them, or we'll have to defeat some of them. So either way, it's better to understand them.
Dan, thank you so much. Have a great New Year, and we'll talk with you again very soon. Dan Wos, the author of Good Gun, Bad Guy. Have a great day, sir, and thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you, Kevin.
Folks, we're going to take you up to CBS and local news, back with Open Line, hour number 2 on the Morning Magazine.
The Talk of the Lake. News Talk 1150 KRMS Osage Beach and 97.5 KRMS FM Laurie. 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 Laurie.